The first sound is dripping water. Slow, measured, like the tick of a clock that has forgotten its own time. In the darkness of the earth, a single droplet strikes stone, echoing into silence so profound it becomes a prayer. A torch flares, and the hidden chamber reveals itself in trembling light. Walls rough cut as if clawed from the hill itself. A low ceiling heavy with the breath of centuries. Here, beneath the soil of England, lies a secret sanctuary, a place where the fallen King Henry II's estranged son, Henry of Anjou, once sought refuge in shame and repentance. It is not a palace. It is not even a home. It is an exile carved into limestone, a hollow of surrender. The air is thick with dampness, the taste of moss rising from the stones. You can smell the smoke of long extinguished candles trapped in the very pores of the rock. You can almost see him there, cloak ragged, gold embroidery fraying at the edges. A king who once bore a crown now kneeling before a crude stone altar. His hands tremble as they brush across the chill surface, feeling not power but penance. Above ground, kingdoms clashed, and banners unfurled in bloody defiance. Below, silence reigned. In this hidden chapel, the sound of his breath was his liturgy, his heartbeat, his only congregation. The weight of betrayal pressed into his shoulders, heavier than any crown, for he had worn one once and lost it. Lost it not to the thunder of swords alone, but to pride, to family, to a God who demanded more than conquest. Imagine him in the stillness. The flicker of a torch painting his gaunt face in waves of orange. The echo of chants lingering from memory, whispers of followers now scattered to ash. His crown may have been stolen, but his faith remained chained to him like iron shackles. He prayed not for victory, but for absolution, tracing the cross upon his chest with a hand calloused from both sword and sorrow. The cave itself seemed to breathe with him, its walls damp with centuries, its floor etched by knees that had pressed down in ritual repetition. Every crevice a confession, every drip of water a reminder that time moves forward, that even stone erodes. And yet he remained, clinging to fragments of salvation. Outside, the land of England whispered with storms, hedgerows bent in the wind, fields darkened under clouds swollen with rain. Bells tolled in distant parishes, carrying songs of a world that had forgotten him. But here in the belly of earth, the Hermit-King listened only to silence. Silence that judged him more harshly than any tribunal. Silence that asked questions he dared not answer. Did he remember the clash of banners, the roar of men dying for his name? Did he hear again the screams of those who followed him into defeat? Did he see their faces in the flames of his torch, accusing eyes in every lick of fire? Perhaps that is why he built this hollow shrine. Not as a palace, but as a confessional, stone and soil binding him to penance more secure than any chain. And yet, even in exile, he could not shed the weight of kingship entirely. Visitors came. Some whispered, some cursed, some begged his blessing as if the crown were still his to give. His cave became more than shelter. It became legend, the dwelling of a monarch who had traded throne for solitude, command for silence. The architecture speaks of his mind. Narrow doorways bent low, forcing even the proudest to bow. Small cells, each one bare, each one cold. No feast, no music, no courtly dance, only candle smoke, chalk dust, the smell of wet stone. The chapel itself, a hollow chamber with rough benches, echoes of psalms inscribed in air long since faded. There is no ornament here. The altar is plain, the walls undecorated. And yet, in this simplicity, there is a grandeur that courts could never mimic, the grandeur of surrender. Close your eyes, and you can hear his voice murmuring prayers in Latin, words half swallowed by the dripping water. Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. His tone cracked, both regal and broken. The words rising like incense towards ceilings too low to let them escape. Every syllable pressing against the rock, trapped forever in the memory of stone. The cave is no longer merely a ruin. It is a reliquary of guilt. Each mark upon its surface, each notch carved into its wall, is a fragment of his confession. Archaeologists brush away centuries of soil, and in the silence they uncover more than stone. They uncover a man undone by ambition, rebuilt by penitence. And yet, what is penitence when the world above still bleeds? Did his withdrawal absolve the sins of his reign, or did it deepen them? While he knelt in shadow, armies marched in light. While his voice whispered prayers, others shouted war cries. While his knees pressed stone, his people starved, his allies schemed, his enemies thrived. Perhaps that is the cruelest truth of his sanctuary. That solitude could not undo history. That silence could not drown the roar of a broken kingdom. But still, the image remains. A torch guttering, a cloak heavy with damp, a crown invisible but still burning upon his head. The cave stands as a monument not to triumph, but to frailty. It is the memory of a king who chose exile over execution, silence over spectacle. And as we stand at the threshold now, centuries later, we feel that same weight pressing against our chests. The cave exhales, and with it comes the sorrow of forgotten prayers. We touch the rough lintel, fingers brushing grooves carved by hands that once trembled with both fear and faith. The darkness within calls us deeper, but at its mouth we pause. For beyond this chamber lies not just the memory of one king's exile, but the echo of an entire age when power was fragile and faith the only rope left to grasp. The flame falters, shadows bend, and the silence urges us forward, toward the next revelation, toward the next discovery that will peel back the veil of medieval life. For this is not the end. It is only the first descent into the hidden world beneath the stones. Salt water drips from iron. A single droplet slides along the edge of a corroded blade, falls into the tide pool below, and vanishes into rippling silence. For nearly 1,000 years, the sea has held its breath around this relic. A sword once lifted in battle, now surrendered to salt, barnacle, and time. A diver's hand rises from the waves, trembling as it clutches the encrusted weapon. Its weight is staggering, not for the iron, but for the lives that cling invisibly to it. The gulls scream above the shore, their wings cutting through the wind like arrows. Sunlight strikes the blade, catching flecks of rust, and for a moment it almost shines. Almost, as though remembering what it once was. Close your eyes, and you can see the knight who wielded it. Armor clattering as he strode across a ship's deck, salt wind burning his face, heart pounding in rhythm with the waves. His gauntlets grip this very hilt, its leather worn smooth by sweat and prayer. He may have whispered to it, as some knights did, invoking saints or calling upon Christ to bless the steel. Then the cry of battle rose, arrows hissed, wood splintered, voices shouted in fury, and the sword sang in his hand, a hymn of iron and blood. But the sea is a jealous guardian. Perhaps the knight fell on deck, struck by a blade he never saw. Perhaps he tumbled into the waves, armor dragging him into darkness, sword slipping from his hand as the salt water filled his lungs. Or perhaps he raised it one last time, a defiant gesture against an oncoming tide of men before being cut down where he stood. Whatever the truth, the sea claimed him. The sea claimed everything. Centuries passed. The ocean wrapped the blade in silence. Shells clung to its edge. Barnacles built their homes upon it. Fish swam through its notches as though patrolling sacred ground. The steel corroded, rust spread like rot across its surface. And still it endured. Beneath storms, beneath tempests, beneath the endless weight of waves, the sword waited. Not as a weapon now, but as a witness. When it was raised from the depths, the silence broke. Air hissed through the diver's mask. Waves struck against the rocks. Gulls screamed. For the first time in a millennium, the blade breathed. In that moment, time itself seemed to collapse. What had been buried was alive again, and the story of the night, though nameless, stirred in the wind. The archaeologists who gathered around it on the shore spoke in hushed tones, as though standing before a relic of faith. Their gloves brushed away sand, their tools scraped gently at the rust. And as they worked, the sword revealed itself, its hilt, its crossguard, its point dulled but unbroken. Every detail carried the echo of its world. This was not an ornament. It was not ceremonial. It was meant to kill, to defend, to decide who would live and who would fall. And yet, what remains is not the violence, but the silence after. The silence of a man who never returned home, whose name was never carved in stone, whose story dissolved into the sea. His sword is his only voice now. Think of the world he left behind. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer as this blade was forged, sparks flying in a darkened forge. The prayers muttered by his family as he marched off to war. The chill of dawn on the day he sailed. The taste of salted bread, the clatter of hooves in the harbor. He carried all of this with him, and all of it sank into the waves with him. The blade, lifted now into the light, is heavy with memory. Not only his, but of the age itself. An age when faith and war were inseparable, when kingdoms rose and fell upon steel. An age when men pledged their lives to causes larger than themselves, and when the sea, always, waited for its due. It is easy to romanticize the knight, to see only valor in the rust. But look closer. The blade is pitted, jagged, eaten away by time. Its beauty lies in its ruin, and within that ruin is truth. That glory fades, that steel rusts, that every conquest is temporary. The sea teaches us this. And yet the sword remains. It has outlived its wielder, his enemies, his king, his kingdom. It has outlived the language he spoke, the prayers he whispered, the banners he followed. It has endured what flesh could not, and in its endurance, it offers us a mirror. What will survive of us? What relics of our lives will the future hold, and what stories will they whisper when we are dust? The gulls wheel above, their cries sharp against the roar of the tide. The sword rests now upon a table, cleaned but not restored. It does not need restoration. Its scars are its story. Its corrosion is its memory. In silence, it speaks more than polished steel ever could. As the torchlight flickers across its surface, one sees not just a weapon, but a testament to human ambition, to mortality, to the inexorable tide of time. The sword is both relic and requiem, a fragment of a world that is gone, yet not forgotten. And so, as we linger on this image, a sword raised from silence, gleaming faintly through its rust, we are drawn to what lies beyond. For if such a weapon can survive, what else waits beneath the soil, beneath the sea, beneath the ruins of forgotten lives? What other stories lie silent, yearning to be unearthed? The blade rests. The waves crash, the silence deepens, and we step forward into the next shadow, where another discovery waits to speak. The forest holds its breath. In the hush between branches, where light struggles through a ceiling of leaves, something waits beneath the soil. A shape, dark and buried, taller than a man, carved in silence centuries ago. The first strike of the spade against earth sends up the smell of damp loam, thick and rich, the scent of memory itself. Roots curl like veins around the hidden form, binding it in secrecy. And then, with a final tug, the ground yields. An idol emerges, 8 feet tall, blackened with age, its wooden body scarred yet unbroken. Moss drapes from its shoulders like a rotting cloak. Its face, if face it can be called, is abstract, haunting. Its features gouged by a hand both reverent and fearful. For 1,000 years it has slept in silence. Now it returns to the light, staring at us with eyes that were never meant for ours. The air is heavy with damp bark and resin. Pine needles crunch beneath boots. The archaeologists step back in awe, their breaths quick and shallow, as though disturbing more than wood. For this is not just a statue, it is a ghost of a forgotten faith. A god carved when the world was still wild, when the church bells had only just begun to toll across medieval Europe. Imagine the hands that shaped it. Calloused palms, steady strokes of the axe, wood chips flying in the flicker of torchlight. Around the craftsman, a circle of others watched in silence, their cloaks smelling of smoke and sweat, their breaths fogging in the cold. He carved not merely to create, but to invoke. Every cut was a prayer, every groove a bargain with forces older than Christendom. When he finished, they raised the idol into the grove, its presence towering, commanding reverence. Here, offerings would have been laid, grain from the harvest, milk poured into the roots, perhaps even blood, human or animal, staining the soil at its feet. Torches crackled in the night, flames dancing against its carved body, shadows twisted into shapes that frightened children and strengthened the faithful. This was a god of the forest, of fertility, of death. A god no longer spoken of in the open once priests and bishops declared him heresy. But faith does not vanish with decree. It hides. It lingers in the corners of belief, whispered by women tending fires, muttered by men in the fields. And here, in this grove, it survived. While church bells rang from stone towers, this idol stood silent among trees, receiving devotion in the dark. The symbolism was not lost on the villagers. To them, the church was walls and rules, incense and Latin words they barely understood. But the idol, they could touch it. They could lean their foreheads against its wooden chest, breathe in its scent of sap and smoke, and feel close to something raw, something primal. Its eyes, unblinking, promised answers no priest could give. Yet time is merciless. As Christianity's hold strengthened, idols like this were toppled, burned, or buried. Perhaps this one was dragged to the woods and sunk into the soil not as preservation, but as execution. Or perhaps a follower buried it in secret, protecting it from fire, preserving their god in silence. Either way, it vanished beneath roots and earth, hidden from the gaze of bishops and kings. And now, Its resurrection unsettles us, for in its form we see a world both familiar and foreign. We recognize the yearning, the need to believe, to offer, to connect with something beyond ourselves. But we fear the darkness of it, the reminder that belief can take shapes both beautiful and terrible. Standing before it, one feels watched. The trees seem to lean closer, the air grows colder, the silence thickens. You can almost hear the chants again, the rhythm of drums echoing against bark, voices rising in unity, in desperation. The idol does not move, but its presence presses against the chest, heavy as stone. Its rediscovery does not merely rewrite history. It reminds us that the medieval world was not one faith, one voice, one path. Beneath the veneer of Christianity lay layers of belief, older, rawer, less forgiving. Farmers might bow before the cross by day, then steal into the woods by night to whisper before the idol. Children might learn the Lord's Prayer, but also stories of spirits dwelling in oak and river. The medieval world was not singular. It was divided, layered, haunted. And in that haunting, we find the truth. Faith is not easily replaced. It lingers like smoke after a fire, seeping into walls, into soil, into memory. The idol is that smoke solidified, enduring long after the flames of doctrine swept across the land. As the archaeologists lift it into the light, its surface cracks, shedding flakes of wood that crumble like ash between their fingers. Yet its form endures. A god too long buried to be forgotten. Its silence demands remembrance. And so we stand at the edge of the grove, watching this idol emerge into a world that has long abandoned it. But its shadow stretches far, reminding us of the lives who once trembled before it, the voices who once sang to it, the children who once feared its gaze. It is not just wood. It is memory. It is devotion. It is loss. The forest exhales. A bird bursts from the branches, startled, its wings scattering leaves into spirals. The idol looms, mute but insistent, a reminder that the medieval heart was divided between Christ and something older, darker, untamed. We leave it there, not at rest but restless, its story unfinished. For beyond the grove lies another discovery, another voice from the silence of centuries. This is not the end, only the next step into the labyrinth of medieval belief. The torch gutters, the forest deepens, and the idol waits, watching us go. The chapel is dark, save for the wavering glow of candles. Their flames bend and shiver, casting long fingers of light across the wood. And there it stands, the altarpiece. A towering panel of carved devotion, painted in pigments of crushed lapis, red ochre, and gold leaf that once caught every glimmer of dawn. Its surface is alive, even now, centuries after its unveiling. The saints and martyrs gaze outward with hollow eyes, their expressions both serene and severe, their halos gleaming faintly in the half-light. The wood breathes with age, a faint musk of incense, wax, and dust clinging to its grain. For the villagers who once gathered here, this was more than decoration. This was salvation made visible. The poor who trudged in with mud on their boots, the weary mothers with children pressed close, the old men hunched beneath cloaks of patched wool, all of them found their eyes drawn upward. In these figures, they saw the path from pain to paradise. Each saint bore a weapon, a wound, a crown of thorns, or a scroll of promise. Each detail told them that suffering could be sanctified, that their hunger and grief were not in vain. But behind this shimmering vision, another story lies, of the hands that made it. The artisan, hunched in a workshop filled with the acrid scent of oils and resins, carved saints by lamplight. His chisel chipped the wood with careful reverence, though his thoughts may have wandered to debts unpaid, to his children's hunger, to the illness that had crept into his wife's chest. His fingers were stained red from vermilion, blue from lapis dust, his lungs coated with the powders of crushed stone. And yet he pressed on, each stroke of pigment a prayer, each detail an offering, his own silent liturgy carved into the grain. The altarpiece became his confession, though no priest heard it. Every fold of a robe, every outstretched hand, every mournful eye bore traces of his struggle. He could not afford the luxury of faith untested. His devotion was in the hours spent breathing fumes by candlelight, painting until his sight blurred and his hands shook. And when the panel was finally raised in the church, glowing with fresh color, the congregation saw heaven. He saw survival. In time, the altarpiece became the heart of ritual. On feast days, garlands of flowers were draped across its frame, their perfume rising sweet and heady into the air. The bells clanged overhead, their vibrations rattling the wooden saints as if awakening them to bear witness. On ordinary days, the faithful lit candles at its base, smoke curling in spirals like whispered prayers. The panel soaked in those prayers, absorbing them into its wood. Each flicker of light, each sigh, each tear shed before it seeped into its surface, layer upon layer of human longing. But devotion is fragile. When plague swept through the town, the congregation thinned. The pews emptied, the bells fell silent, and the altarpiece stood alone. Dust gathered where worshippers once knelt, wax hardened into gray lumps across the floor. The saints gazed outward, their painted lips parted as if mid-breath, but the prayers had ceased. The silence was deafening. Even then, the panel endured. Its colors faded, its gilding chipped, yet it remained steadfast. Through centuries of upheaval, wars that rattled the stones, reformations that stripped churches bare, iconoclasts who smashed relics, it somehow survived. Perhaps hidden away in a storeroom, or covered by cloth, or spared by a hand that hesitated at the thought of destroying beauty. Whatever its path, the altarpiece endured, carrying within it the residue of centuries of worship. And when at last it was uncovered, when archaeologists brushed away the dust of ages, the saints returned to light. Their faces cracked but unyielding, their colors muted but still speaking, their presence undeniable. Standing before them now, you feel the weight of every life that bent the knee here, every hope whispered into silence. It is not only paint and wood, it is memory incarnate. Close your eyes and you can hear it. The murmured Latin prayers rolling like waves, the chime of bells punctuating the liturgy, the shuffle of knees on stone as villagers bent low. You can smell beeswax thick in the air, incense curling through beams of sunlight, flowers wilting on the altar. The voices rise and fall, a chorus of desperation and devotion, carried upward toward heaven. And through it all, the altarpiece gleams, a silent witness to faith that both lifted and burdened. But there is also something else, something hidden. For while the congregation saw the saints, the artisan saw his own life reflected in the details. The sorrow carved into Mary's eyes was his sorrow. The wounds of martyrs mirrored his wounds. In gilded halos, he sought redemption not just for humanity, but for himself. The panel was not only devotion, it was survival made sacred. And so the altarpiece stands between worlds. To the villagers, it was divine. To the artisan, it was necessity. To us, it is revelation. Revelation that medieval life was not only faith in God, but faith in the work of hands, in the endurance of beauty, in the persistence of memory against the tide of oblivion. As we step back from its surface, the candlelight flickers. The saints seem to shift in the shadows, their eyes following us, pleading with us not to forget. For their story is not finished. Beyond this altar lies another discovery, another layer of medieval life waiting to be unearthed. The bells toll faintly in the distance, their echo carried on the wind. The last candle burns low, smoke curling into the rafters like a ghost. And as the flame gutters out, the altarpiece fades into shadow once more, its devotion hidden but never gone. A single shaft of sunlight breaks through a narrow window, striking the edge of a wooden table. Upon it lies a needle, small, almost invisible, yet gleaming with a quiet authority. Dust floats in the air, swirling in the golden beam, while the room holds the scent of boiled wool, of smoke curling from a dying hearth, of sweat clinging to garments long unwashed. This needle is no ordinary object. In an age where iron was dear and possessions few, such a tool was as rare and precious as coin. For the women who bent over fabric in dim chambers, it was power itself, the power to shape, to mend, to preserve dignity in a world that often stripped it away. Imagine her hands, fingers red and raw from the cold, nails ridged with labor, yet deft as they guide the thread through cloth. Her gown is faded, but once, perhaps, its silk was bright. She hums softly, a tune passed down from mother to daughter, each note a ward against despair. Outside, the bells toll the hour, their sound muffled through stone walls. But here in the silence, the whisper of thread through fabric is its own liturgy. Every stitch carries weight. For in a medieval court, garments were more than clothing. They were identity. A cloak dyed deep crimson marked the wealthy. A hood lined with fur declared privilege. A tunic patched and repatched spoke of hunger and toil. The needle gave form to these distinctions, quietly maintaining the fragile order of society. Through its point, women stitched not only fabric, but the invisible seams of power, loyalty, and survival. Yet this was also exile. Sewing was work done in silence, behind walls, hidden from the pageantry of knights and kings. Women stitched while men marched to war, stitched while priests thundered sermons, stitched while plague carts rolled through the streets. Each thread was a tether, binding them to a life of duty, service, and invisibility. The needle was both tool and chain. Still, within its smallness lay rebellion. With every garment repaired, every hem reworked, a woman carved out endurance. She shaped beauty from scarcity, dignity from decay. In candlelight, her needle glinted like a weapon, though it pierced only cloth. Perhaps in her heart, she knew its quiet defiance, that while men wielded swords to conquer lands, she wielded steel to preserve life. Archaeologists uncover such needles with reverence, brushing away soil that has protected them for centuries. Their discovery tells us what no chronicle records, that survival was not only written in battles and treaties, but in the unseen labor of hands. The tiny shard of iron speaks of an entire world of women who stitched through the long nights, who kept families clothed, who sustained rituals of ceremony and faith, even as war and famine raged outside. Picture the rhythm of her day. The morning begins with the smoke of hearth fire stinging her eyes. She sorts rough wool, the smell of lanolin clinging to her skin, or soft linen spun from flax that once grew along riverbanks. She threads her needle with practiced precision, squinting against the dim light. Children cry in the background, their bellies empty. A husband mutters about rents unpaid. Still she sews. Still she endures. And in the upper halls of castles, noble women too bend over fabric. Their fingers, adorned with rings, stitch gowns embroidered with golden thread, each knot a declaration of wealth, each motif a prayer for fertility, favor, fortune. The needle crosses all boundaries, peasant, merchant, noble. It unites them in silent labor, even as their stitches carve vastly different lives. In the silence of the workroom, one hears the faint scrape of thread, the sigh of fabric folding beneath the weight of the hand. The needle pierces, pulls, and pierces again, rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Hours pass unnoticed. Outside, the world shifts. Armies march, bells toll, seasons turn. But here, the rhythm continues, a hymn to survival, a hymn to the unseen. Then plague comes. Death creeps into the town. The sewing stops, the garments lie unfinished, the needle abandoned on the table. Candle smoke curls upward, but no hand returns to claim it. Centuries later, archaeologists find it. Small, corroded, but intact, a fragment of devotion, of labor, of life interrupted. Holding it now, one feels the weight of those centuries. This sliver of iron once threaded through the fabric of history, binding together lives that might otherwise have unraveled. It is not grand like a sword, not gilded like an altar, not towering like an idol, but it is intimate. It is personal. It carries the breath of the women who once leaned close to their work, who whispered lullabies as they stitched, who prayed as they pulled thread through fabric. The needle reminds us that medieval life was not only shaped by kings and battles, but by the unseen endurance of women whose names history rarely records. Their legacy is not in monuments, but in stitches, tiny, precise, fragile, enduring. As the candle burns low, its flame bending into shadow, we see the needle gleam one final time. It is both relic and metaphor, a shard of survival, a reminder that history is stitched not only with swords, but with quiet persistence. The room fades into silence, the fabric lies still, and the needle, abandoned yet eternal, waits for the next hand that will never come. The door creaks. Its hinges, powdered with rust and mildew, moan against the silence of a deserted street. Beyond the threshold lies a world hollowed by plague. No footsteps, no market cries, no children's laughter, only the stillness of stone and the low tolling of a bell that marks not the hour, but the dead. Inside the house, the air is heavy with the bitter scent of herbs, lavender, rue, rosemary, burned in fumigation rites to keep the sickness at bay. Smoke lingers in the rafters, mingling with the damp musk of walls slick with condensation. A woman stands cloaked by the door, her hands clutching fabric frayed from worry. She listens. She dares not open it wide, for outside waits exile, contagion, and the invisible hand of death. Quarantine. The word itself was a wall, a sentence, a barrier between the living and the doomed. In Venice, ships arriving from distant ports were held offshore for 40 days. Sailors watched the city from their decks, their eyes burning with longing for its towers, its lights, its promise of home. On the rocky islets beyond the lagoon, camps of the sick were left to languish, their coughs carried on the wind. Within city gates, houses were sealed. Guards patrolled the streets, marking doors with chalk, hammering boards across thresholds. Families inside prayed, wept, and waited, bound together not by chains of iron, but by the decree of silence. The woman touches the wooden lintel above her head, her fingers tracing scratched prayers carved by desperate hands before her. Words barely legible now, miserere nobis, have mercy on us. She closes her eyes and whispers them again, her breath trembling in the stale air. The sound is swallowed by the stones. The rituals of daily life have been replaced by the rituals of fear. Garments are hung outside in the sun, their fabric stiff from lye and vinegar. Coins are dropped into bowls of water, disinfected before hands dare touch them. Food is left at doorsteps in silence. Neighbors no longer speak across fences. The world has narrowed to walls and whispers. Outside the sealed door, the street is a corridor of absence. Shops shuttered, wells untended. Cats prowl where children once played, their cries sharp in the emptiness. From distant alleys comes the rumble of wooden carts, wheels squealing, as they bear the shrouded dead toward pits dug beyond the city walls. Priests murmur prayers too quickly to be heard, their voices drowned by the coughing of the dying. And overhead, the sky itself seems darker, as though the sun recoils from what it sees below. But within the house, time bends. Days blur into nights. The woman paces the stone floor, her footsteps hollow. She lights a candle, its flame sputtering against the damp, and watches smoke curl toward the beams. Each hour becomes an eternity. Each sound, a cough, a shuffle, a sigh, could be the beginning of the end. The silence is worse than noise, for in silence grows the echo of dread. Yet even here, humanity clings to fragments of hope. Some stitch charms into their clothes, scraps of parchment inked with psalms. Some tie sprigs of rosemary to their belts, believing its fragrance a shield. Mothers sing lullabies in cracked voices, their songs trembling as prayers disguised as comfort. The church bells toll, not for matins or vespers, but to count the passing souls. Their sound is relentless, a dirge that blankets the city. Quarantine was more than isolation. It was a wound in the heart of community. The marketplace, the soul of medieval life, fell silent. The taverns, the guild halls, the chapels, all deserted. Love itself became dangerous. Touch could kill. A kiss could carry death. Families sat apart at meager tables, their meals eaten in silence, each bite heavy with fear. And yet, there was resilience. Windows opened at dusk, and voices rose in prayer across alleys, each household invisible to the other, yet united in their cries to heaven. Lanterns glowed faintly in windows, small stars against the black, reminders that life, fragile and trembling, still endured. The woman by the door finally lets her cloak fall. She kneels, her knees pressing into cold stone, her lips moving silently. She does not pray for herself, but for her children asleep in the next room, their breath soft, their faces flushed with fever, or perhaps only sleep. She prays for morning, for bread, for mercy. And as she bows her head, a faint sound trembles at the edge of hearing, the roll of a cart, the toll of a bell, the scrape of a guard's boots. Her prayer is swallowed by these sounds, but it rises nonetheless, carried into the silence like smoke into night. Centuries later, the archaeologists uncover traces of these quarantines, houses sealed from the inside, doors scarred by boards nailed across them, pest houses built on barren islets where the sick were abandoned. They find coins charred from fire, garments stiffened by treatments, skeletons piled in haste, their bones whispering of hurried burials and forgotten names. And in those discoveries lies the human truth, that quarantine was not only survival, but exile, loneliness, guilt. It was faith stretched thin, hope fragile as a flame in wind. As the candle within the woman's chamber burns low, its wax pooling, its wick bending into silence, we're left with an image, a door, a threshold, a place where life and death meet, separated only by wood and decree, a barrier that speaks of both protection and prison, a threshold that no one dared cross. The hinge groans again as wind presses against the door. The flame flickers. The woman raises her head, and in that moment, she is every soul who has ever waited at the edge of danger, hoping the barrier will hold. The silence deepens. The city holds its breath. And just beyond the threshold lies the next chapter, of what was lost, and of what endured when the world itself seemed to teeter between survival and oblivion. The first breath is stone. Cold, chalky air slips into the lungs and tastes of lime and old incense. A flame lowers through the darkness, and a chamber unfolds. Arches ribbed like the underbelly of a sleeping animal, pillars sweating with centuries of damp. The light stutters across walls cut close to the earth, and there, on ledges and within niches, skulls wait in their ranks. Jawbones ajar, teeth bared in permanent psalm, eye sockets pooled with shadow. Dust floats through the torch glow like snow that forgot how to fall. Listen. The crypt has its own weather. Water ticking from the ceiling into a hollow basin, the soft rasp of burlap against stone, the sigh of air when a door above is opened and closed. Long ago, these sounds were wrapped in prayer. Cloaks whispered along the steps. A bell somewhere in the nave throbbed through the columns, and the steady rhythm of shoes carried the dead down into the quiet. Each arrival a ceremony, even when grief was hurried, even when pestilence forced hands to move faster than the heart. The bones were not tossed but placed. Femurs set parallel, humeri crossed beneath a shining skull, ribs stacked like the stave of a harp. Hands arranged this order, the careful hands of brothers, of bead-worn widows, of sextons who knew the hallway by heart. A rosary crumbled to powder beside a collarbone, a pewter badge of a pilgrim bent to a crescent, tucked near the crown of a skull. These small remains of hope persisted even as flesh retreated, as the body unclasped itself and surrendered to structure. The arrangement itself became a kind of sermon. You will be gathered again. Not thrown aside, gathered. Close your eyes and you can feel the weight of the procession that once pressed through this stone throat. A bier creaks, wax drips, voices murmur in Latin, some sure, some stumbling at the endings. A priest's hand draws a cross in air that cannot hold it. The air smells of beeswax and breath and a distant sweetness of lilies, even in winter. Behind the pall, a child stares wide-eyed at the candle smoke, learning the shape of endings for the first time. Here, one age after another learned how to live with its dead. When the graveyard above grew crowded, the earth gave back its bones. When famine passed, the skulls of the thin took their places with the strong. When plague smashed through the city gates and the pits overflowed, knees still bent on these stairs, and someone, breaking, still whispered the names. Names were the currency of love. Names were the last roof over a life. Archaeologists come now with brushes and hushed voices. Their lamps fan out over shelves where centuries have stared. They kneel where the brothers once knelt and trace the chalk lines of an older order. In sockets and fractures they read hunger, lesions, old quarrels with illness. In a healed break, they see a stubbornness to remain. In a rosary's ghost, they see a stubbornness to hope. The tools they carry are modern, but their gestures are ancient. Lift, listen, lay back, promise not to forget. Among the skulls, there are small ones with milk teeth still new as pearls. There are jaws that kept secrets, and jaws that laughed loud in taverns whose timbers are long gone. There are crowns with a notch where a pipe once sat, and crowns ground flat by bread hard as brick. History lives in enamel, in the small polished basins where tongues once rested to form farewells. A life leaves marks everywhere it leans. Beyond the shelves, the crypt opens into a chamber, blackened by smoke, where a charnel priest once kept vigil. Imagine him wrapped in a heavy cope when frost crept between the stones, his breath a pale offering in the dark. He could read the city by the number of candles he burned. When summer took the olds, he burned slowly. When pestilence came, his fingers blistered. He measured time not by kings but by tolls. 3 strokes for a child, 6 for a woman, 9 for a man, and the wild, continuous rain of sound when the pits filled too fast to count. He knew the living who came down here to speak. A woman who pressed her forehead against the wall and left the damp oval of her grief. A mason who removed his cap before the bone rack as if before a lord. A girl who believed if she counted every skull by touch in the dark, her brother would be spared. He knew them by their footsteps, by the speed of their breath, by whether they could bear to stay as the door thudded and the stone swallowed them. The crypt was an alphabet, and he read what was written in each posture. Endurance was a craft. The city learned to build not only upward but downward, to house its dead when space above had been taken by the crowded living. Bones became architecture and warning, scripture and school. There were hours when a novice sat in the candle glow copying a hand into vellum, and behind him a jawline caught the same light in a lesson that did not require ink. In the cloister, a tomb might wear the figure of its owner carved as a skeleton, ribs spread in sculpted candor, a stone testimony that good lodgings wait for no man. The air of the era thrummed with the message, your life is a borrowed cloak, spare it from vanity, warm others while you wear it. Yet the crypt is not only admonition. In the hush is a tenderness so bare it almost hurts to speak of it. The tenderness of placing a skull with both palms as if it might bruise, of tucking a ribbon that once bound a girl's hair beneath her mother's bones, of whispering a joke the dead used to tell because laughter is a thread that refuses to snap. Love is an unrecorded craft of gestures, and the crypt kept them all. When scholars lift a fragment of cloth from beneath a skull, coarse weave, sun-faded to the pallor of ash, they smell smoke trapped within threads that outlived the hearth that made it. When they find a small wooden cross, split but unburned, they are holding a prayer so persistent it learned how to become wood. When they brush at a ring fused with oxide until the faintest circle of copper green blooms against a finger that is no longer there, they are painting a wedding back into the air. Listen again. Somewhere above, a door opens to the street. Wind tumbles down the stairwell like a pilgrim late to vespers, and the flames bow all at once. A drop of water lets go and strikes the basin, its sound bright in the hush. The torch coughs. The skulls do not stir, but the light animates their smooth faces in 100 small performances of recognition. It feels in that instant as if the city itself has come down to see how it has been remembered. There is always a ledger. In some sacristy, a list sleeps under twine. Names, dates, debts, and alms recorded in a hand that grew crabbed during hard winters. A child's name stopped midline. A saint's day miswritten when the clerk's wife fell ill. A column of numbers that does not tally because grief unsteadied the wrist. The crypt and the ledger speak to each other across stone and paper. One keeps what the other cannot. Together they approach wholeness and fail, because wholeness cannot be had this side of the bell. The torch is almost done. Shadows gather again between the arches like monks filling the choir. Before we climb, look once more at the way the bones were made to keep each other. How the curve of one skull rests in another's alcove. How a hand's small metacarpals cross a frontal ridge as if in benediction. Death is a scattering. This is a reply. A reply in the language of order. A refusal to let the last word belong to ruin. And yet we do not linger as thieves of silence. We rise, taking care not to send our echoes too far ahead. On the stairs, the air warms by degrees, and dust becomes scent, becomes the breath of centuries passing close without names. Through the door, the nave is a gray ocean of stone, and the city above is sounding its present tense. Vendors calling, wheels biting into mud, a child somewhere scolded with a tenderness that will not last long enough. At the threshold, we turn back. Down there, the small stars of candlelight will go on burning after we leave, caught in the lacquer of centuries, not asking to be freed. What we carry up is not only the gravity of bone, but the lightness of having been permitted to belong for a heartbeat to their number, to stand where grief learned to arrange itself into hope. Outside, the weather is changing. The wind draws a line along the rooftops. The bell begins its slow summoning of evening. We will pass a scribe's window glowing like amber, the next chamber of the story, where names are caught on vellum before they slip, where memory is bound with thread and sealed with wax, where the living attempt, once more, to keep the dead from being devoured by forgetting. The crypt exhales behind us. The page inhales ahead. We walk into the narrowing light with the dust of centuries in our throats and the taste of lime still on our tongues, knowing we will descend again, elsewhere, whenever the earth offers up the bones of what was loved. Knowing that every ascent owes its steps to hands that arranged 1,000 small departures into an architecture that can still hold the weight of the living.